If you're anything like me, when you dive into a YouTube video, you're really excited, you're feeling creative, you're about to watch a really talented craftsperson make something beautiful. But a couple of minutes into the video, I often don't have that same feeling because this talented craftsperson has turned to their industrial sized workshop and are using machines that I do not have access to, and I can't see in the foreseeable having access to them. This is what I have access to. I've only very recently even had a way to hold work in this workbench. Some tools here, there are more around me, but these are essentially what I have when it comes to turning large chunky bits of wood into smaller finished bits of wood. But I want to make things. This is something that I very recently made, a teeny tiny box. By working this scale, I had to be very accurate. There's a few filled in pieces here that you may be able to not see or know about if you didn't look too hard. But I could also create this work because of the space that I'm in. I've carved out a corner of my office to create chaos, and the other side is neat and tidy office for working in. This is shavings and sawdust. So it got me thinking, I've got access to this space, and I've also got access to this bag. In this bag, I have some offcuts. I went to a local furniture maker, asked for some offcuts. He very kindly pointed me towards his offcut bins and said, whatever you want from that, help yourself. To him, these are scrap. This one's got a split. To me, these are beautiful bits of oak, and they just have so much potential, so much that I'm excited to get going with. However, with my number 4 plane, the only plane that I own, it's going to take a long time to take this down to anything workable at all. So I wanted to create a router sled because of my recently acquired router. In my opinion, one of the most versatile but affordable power tools, which is why I've gone for it first. So I've been working on something. I've seen various versions of these online, but I don't think I'd seen one that I could see fitting in the space that I have, essentially working with the surface that I have access to, which is this workbench. That's it. So I've created what I think is an ideal project if you want to achieve the same things I did, which is a faster way of finishing these, which I can finish off with a planer but much quicker using a router in a very small space. Let's get started. Here it is, the router sled. Just out of shot is the other end of the sled. We've then got the router and different ways of locking the workpiece. I created this because I don't have much space, as I mentioned. I do have a router, it's very new to me, and I wanted a way to surface down big chunky offcuts, essentially. And when I say big and chunky, I mean in my space, in mine, for the sort of size things that I enjoy working on. Workpiece. So I've used wedge shapes, which are very good at clamping. When you drive them together, they force themselves into the workpiece. And I've set it up in order to all work together, driving tension that way. So this clamp drives that way, this side drives that way, and this side drives down, which pushes the workpiece back, which creates more tension. So they're all working together, and I can knock these out when I'm finished. So it's the right size for me. It fits on top of this workbench. There's a softwood piece underneath, which means that I can clamp it in this channel here, so that's useful. And there's a couple of fun features. Elephant in the room. Why am I dressed like this? This may be a stupid idea visor. I like my eyes. I like them so much that I've got this plastic mesh glasses, but I'm not quite sure what this is up to. That's partly because the router blade is extended below more than it would usually be. Why the raincoat? I've done one test previous to setting this up and recording it without the hoover, and chips were flying everywhere. Well, they got inside my sleeves, and I was wearing a fleece, and man, did they just grab onto that fleece. And even with my brush that I used to get rid of all my dust, I was struggling. So I've also am mildly embarrassed to admit that I've got a baking tray in a bag underneath this top. So that's my safety cupboard, and actually I've got a brilliant feature as well. If you see on the top here. This green light means that this is ready to go. I'll just very carefully pop it down. Still green light. I have got myself a comically sized button, so I've just kicked it there. That switches it off, no more green light. And the great thing about this is if I have the on switch on, which I do right now, even if I press this button back on, I've got a flashing red button, which means I need to switch the router off before I can get going again. That to me is brilliant. I can be working on this. If I get into any issues at all, I've got this massive comical size button right there. I've tried to lead all the wires away from it so that I've got access without tripping. So really handy button, and it's better than I thought with the fact that when I switch it back on, the router doesn't just fire back up. So just try to itch my nose. I can plug the Hoover in, but the Hoover unbalances the router essentially, which is why I just held in place there. I'm excited to take it for a spin and show you. First time with the Hoover attachment. This came with this router. I'm just going to hit the off button while I'm getting it ready so I don't accidentally start it firing. So I can adjust the height here. I want to take a very small pass, and I think it's slightly too high right now, so I'm just going to adjust the router. Just going to kiss this surface. And then one thing that I think is probably worth me doing is checking heights on others, so it will kiss this surface as well, but then it appears to be slightly higher on that side. The other thing that I'll mention before I fire it up and get going is that I'm always going to go left to right. This is spinning clockwise. I don't want it to be fighting the blade, and it also means that as it's going, it's again pushing my workpiece into the clamps, into being even more secure. So it's a win-win. So I'm going to hit the button here. I've got a green light on top. Now, here comes the noise. Enjoy. So that was my first pass. I think it was fairly successful. I'm fighting the vacuum slightly, which is a shame, but it is collecting dust. This is my office as well, so if it collects some of these, which it has done a great job of. As you can see, it's not absolutely perfect. It's taking like, I don't know, that's such a small difference, but I can see the steps. So it's just very slightly different height every time it does a pass, but this is just getting me closer to having this workable and usable. Big button, it's brilliant. At some point I might even hook up the Hoover to it with a double plug. That would be ideal to turn off both at the same time. Everything seems to be going pretty well. One thing that I've considered that I might do to improve this at a later date, the electricity's off, so I'm going to pull out to have a look, is create a broader face here to distribute the weight across this angle iron. I think people call these angle irons. And these were the thinnest, cheapest angle irons that I chose that I felt would withstand this pressure and weight. And I tested that very scientifically by pushing on them in the store. So there we go. I'll take a couple more passes and enjoy this feeling. And the idea of this tool is that it's my own personal, very compact desktop planer, and I'll be able to get a surface finish here, surface finish on the other side, and then work from that point forwards. And it's just going to save me a lot of time taking very rough scraps and moving forwards with them. So I'm chuffed. I'll take some more passes. Enjoy. So it's a bit fiddly to adjust the height, and I've gone way too deep there. Probably gone about 1.5 mil, maybe 2, which is much deeper than I intended to. There isn't that super fine adjustment with this, it's by eye. So I've backed it off, and I'll just work through it again. And there we have it. Surfaced. I've got that step there. It turns out me backing up didn't change much, but it seemed relatively happy. And yeah, I've got a surface finish. I've got some tear out here, which tells me I'm probably working against the grain, and that's useful. And that means that when I come to finish it off with my number 4 smoothing plane, which is the only plane I own, I'll work in the opposite direction. But Very pleased with that. So, time to hoover this up, flip it over, and I think I might do one more interesting test for you. So, I want to put this to the test with firewood, kind of the ultimate gnarly piece of wood that I could experiment with. I want to do some carving with this. I don't need all of it, so I think I'm going to chop it down around here to give me enough to play with. And the reason I've stacked it up in here is because I do have a maximum height right now here. Until I get some other pieces for extra railings that I could do to increase the height, my maximum height is this height. So interestingly, it does look like I could have fitted it in lengthwise, so I can work with pieces up to this length just using this, which is great. Time to get to work. So there we go, second experiment done. So from this to this, with a little bit of help from some hand planing, but this just gives me a much more workable piece. I'm going to be carving with this, so I don't mind that it's still got some rough edges, but if I was going to be creating anything like this, I would be wanting to clear up the sides with a hand plane. Not bad. Let's see if I can see where it once belonged. Just about there. So if you're interested in putting together your own version of this, if you're in a similarly small space, maybe you already have a router and would benefit from quickly processing these chunky bits of wood, here's what I needed. So let's go from the bottom upwards. So this is, I believe, 18mm melanin chipboard. And this is exactly the size as I bought it. Haven't changed any dimensions. It's 60 by 30. And actually, having just measured it, I see a sign on the side, a sticker on the side saying it's actually 16mm. It was very handy getting this at this size. I didn't change anything, and it was, as you can see, just about the right size. So the next thing that I got was these 900mm, and I've finished these off, so I'm not exactly sure the size that I bought them at, but it's now around 65 by 65, but it wasn't square before I worked on it. Right, then we've got this angle iron. I've got 2 of these, and they were 100 by 2 by 2. I've managed to do all of the fixtures from a sheet of, let's see, 18 mil, and that was sold in a very handy 600 by 300 as well, which is a brilliant size. The local DIY store in British English, hardware store in American English. My local one sells boards at this size, which is perfect for me in this workshop. It really is ideal. Just noticed how dented up that one is. And then the final other part that I used was, I can't remember exact length, but it was leftovers from this project, and it was this batten here. So you can see it used in these ends here, and then also the rib that's being gripped by the table. So let's just do some quick measurements here. Okay, so these are the materials required. Now I also bought some 22mm dowel, which I intended to use within these 20mm holes that I've created. But as you watch on to see how I went about building this, you'll see that actually I've not ended up using these holes or these dowels as my fixtures, so no need to get that. What I'm partly trying to show here is that I've used materials that I can process with a handsaw and just get on with. That's why I was particularly chuffed with the chipboard. Often the DIY hardware stores will do at least one cut for you, which is helpful if you don't, like me, have a skill saw or a circular saw. As you can see, not too many materials went into this before I could get up and running, and it was really affordable, it was really cheap, so that was handy as well. So if, like me, you've got access to a router and just a small space, and maybe you're interested in recreating this for yourself, I'm going to take you through the process that I took in order to make this. Enjoy. So, as you can tell from all these shavings, I've taken this down, despite the fact it was bought as if it was planed on all 4 sides. I found that it wasn't quite square, so I've been taking quite a large amount of time to try and square this up. Got my face edge here, and then my second reference, and it's not perfect, but it's as close as I'm willing to get it right now. So the next step of this project is to cut this in half, and a great trick that I use for this is a knife wall. It's not quite a trick, but Paul Sellers is the inspiration for what I've seen. So I've got my line cutting this in half. I'm then going to use my square, pop my knife onto my pencil line, which I've already marked out, and then just start to draw it across. Just very light to begin with, and you just do a few pulls, just pressing slightly harder each time. And what this does is it cuts through the first fibres, so it creates a notch for your saw to be guided by. And because it doesn't matter what end, I'm going to do it on 2 sides. It doesn't matter which end, seeing the end doesn't matter for this project. So I'm actually going to take this one step further. Something that, again, it's only Paul Sellers I've seen do this, but it's really handy for me because I'm not the best with a saw. So what he does, he grabs a chisel, and I'm going to keep this hand behind it from learn from experience, and he just takes a very slight piece away from each one. So I'm just digging down underneath the knife wall, and because the knife wall's chopped all the fibres, it means it catches it. So what this creates is a groove in which the saw can slot into, and it's very handy. So that's one side. I'll do it the same on the top. The way I think about the chisel, having cut myself slightly, not a bad cut, is I think of the end as burning hot. So anytime I'm moving it around, I try and imagine it being very, very hot. I don't want it anywhere near my fingers. I've been metaphorically burnt before. So it's not particularly neat, but gets the job done, it creates this groove, and for me it's worth spending the time on that in order to get a more accurate result. So I'm not going to take you through all of the sawing experience because you know what sawing is, but I'll do a quick setup. So I've actually set this up using a shooting board that I've made, rather than having I've forgotten the name for it, but the one that you'd usually use to saw. I'm going to be using a Japanese saw with the crosscut blade, and yeah, obviously you know what sawing looks like, but we'll just get started off and then. Okay, so right at the end there, I really didn't want to saw into my shooting board, so you saw me turn it around. And yeah, as you can see, I'm not the best with a saw, but that's not bad. And I'll just clean up this edge with a file, as I normally do. But you can also use a bit of sandpaper for this as well. It's just taking those last bits off. If I really cared about this end, then the knife wall that you saw me do earlier and the chisel, or especially the knife wall, I could have done it all the way around, so at the time that the saw broke out the back, it would be clean. Clamps can be really handy. I've only got 2 of these, but it's a third hand. So as you can see there, I was just off my knife wall, but pretty flat, and this really, I'm spending way too long on this end than compared to what it needs, but I can never help myself. So I'm just doing a final check for square before flipping this over and drilling. It's very, very slightly off, but it's good enough for what I was hoping for. This has just been done all with a hand plane, so good enough for me. When I was coming to choose the side to be my top side, I've just chosen the one with the fewest knots. There's a bit of tear out here from where there might have been some hint of something inside the wood, but yeah, this is going to give me the flattest surface. And I will admit to a very embarrassing mistake. I got my measurements totally wrong when I halved this piece of wood, so if you just use this for scale, obviously it doesn't fit, but I was way off when I halved it, embarrassingly so. A lot of what I do normally is much smaller scale, and so I always measure twice, cut once, and with this I just got a bit blasé, whipped out a phone calculator and halved the wrong number, and it doesn't matter, which is good, especially having poured a lot of time and effort into surfacing this, but yeah, not my usual, so very embarrassing. That's all of the holes drilled. It was total overkill the way that I did it. I'm trying to ensure that I got a nice straight hole. That was totally unnecessary, but I like to try and do things fairly carefully, because if I take care over these things, the little things that don't matter, then it means that I'm in a better mindset to take care of the things that are even more important and more accuracy required. So the next step for me is to cut these parts here, cut 3 bits down, but I'll do 6 just to get it all done. I didn't want to screw this in because I want the opportunity to replace out different options if I come up with anything different in the future. And I'm also going to countersink these just to clean up that chipboard a little bit. The melanin. I'm not a big fan of using melanin, but the stability of it is the reason I've gone for it this time. It's perfectly flat and smooth, but Not a big fan. Not quite sure if my countersink's going to be big enough, so let's see. No. I think I have one more. This one's beefy, but quite dull. Doesn't cut as well. When I spin it every time, I'm checking to see if it's held nicely within the chuck. So I'm just whistling down the end just to help the initial, make sure there's no risk of any splitting. It's the final one. I just thought I'd also point out that with the lack of space and using this workbench to clamp this down, you have to get quite creative when it comes to holding workpieces. So I've used these clamps, which I found really handy. They're a lot cheaper than this style, probably about half the price. So I'll be taking a mallet now and tapping these in. It's a homemade mallet, and the head of it was a piece of firewood originally, and that means that there's a split here, so I have to be careful not to use this face of the mallet. So if you see me spinning around and checking, that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to tap this in. Great. So I'll now do exactly the same process on the other side. 3 holes, 3 countersinks, and 3 bits of down. If you don't have a punch, you can always use a screw. So I've got my measurements slightly wrong with this one, but it's no big deal, I'll just pare off the top. I've got 2 options here. I could use a saw or a chisel, and because this is a lovely flat surface, I think chisel is going to be a good option. Okay, because of the countersink, there isn't anything stopping the dowel from breaking out. So I'm going to finish this one off, and then going to revert to the saw. Because that is quite ugly. No one's ever going to see it. It's on the inside, but it's quite ugly. Okay, at this point I'm unnecessarily faffing. That's done. I need to clear this off, flip it over, see what we're left with. Okay, time for a boring part, which is to lay out, where I'm going to drill some holes in order to be able to have various work holding pieces to keep this steady. So this is a fairly large offcut that I've got here from a local furniture maker, not one of my offcuts. This is gold dust for me, gold nugget. I don't really have a plan for this, but I guess I'll maybe have 3 holes here to begin with, 3 more here. Yeah, let's start with that, and obviously I won't be able to help myself but measure it all out equally, even though it really doesn't require that, but I want it to look uniform. So yeah, 3 here, 3 here, 3 here. Let's do it. thought I'd include this part here because a lot of what I see on YouTube, there's a lot of behind the scenes, I think, that we don't see. So I used pallet wood for that scrap wood there, and there was some sort of resin build up in it that's just totally gunked up the cross-cut teeth on my saw. And so I've gone through and I've cleaned it up, and it'll be good to fight another day. But just wanted to share that part, that I took the shortcut of using pallet wood because it's going to be scrap, and I don't want to, I never enjoy drilling into anything nicer, but it does come at a cost of time. You can actually smell that I'm through to the sacrificial piece. It smells great. This is partly why I hate chipboard, because it just chips away. This is very good at biting in, even when I don't want it to. Hopefully I haven't blown through it. I'm fairly confident I haven't, but it'd be a shame if I have. So I'm making progress, but I'm really not a fan of these chip outs. They create quite jagged edges, not to mention they're just ugly. So I'm going to experiment with this masking tape. Watch this space. I've also remembered that it's maybe not a good idea to breathe in the dust created by chipboard, so on the mask goes. So 2 little holes here tell me that I've put 2 tiny points in my workbench, which is my favourite, but the workbench is for working. And let's take a look at what we've got. Terrible trigger discipline there. So, without, with double, let's see. Okay, so with double is probably the best way forward. Yeah, definitely looks that way. Okay, all my holes are done. The next step is going to be the dowel. Obviously, you don't want to sand too much because the very reason I've chosen chipboard melanin is its flatness. But I've just taken away the sharp edges from where the chipboard is split and chipped. And it does appear that 2 bits of masking tape, definitely the way forward when drilling through chipboard in the future, especially with a large drill bit like the one I was using. So I have some oak dowel that is going to be used to help with clamping, essentially, once this jig has got the workpiece within it. And I'm just about to start cutting it. I'm taking this from 22mm, more or less, down to 20mm in diameter. So I'll probably make around 6 of these, maybe more. But I wanted to show how I'm going to quickly mark them. So I don't have a marking gauge, and this is what I do have. These holes are irrelevant. This was just left over from a piece of a project that I was working on. But these are the relevant parts. So here we have a crosshead screw, countersunk flush into the top of a machined edge. And then this is just literally for me to hold on to. I've then filed this down to be very thin, so it's relatively sharp now against that. Before there was a lip on it, not too sharp. What that allows me to do is change the distance that I want and then slide it along to mark a line. It's a marking gauge on the budget, if you like. So what I've done is I've just done it to the length that I require, and now I'll cut this down, and then for the next one I'll just butt this up, make a little mark like this, and then chop it at that mark. So it's just a very easy, repeatable way to get 6 of these done quickly without measuring all along. And if you hadn't already guessed where I first saw this, Paul Sellers, who I might have mentioned already. First one's complete. Sits in there, or will sit in the other piece that I'm making. I've put a cut down just so that it can compress into itself. I did this one off camera I ended up using a whittling knife, which worked. Took a bit of time. Left the saw cut till the end. Kept a shoulder to allow it to not go any further than what I want from it. So I need to make up to 6 more of these. Having done this, I think I might start with 4. And yeah, I think the technique will be to make a deeper cut all the way around at the height that I want, and then start the whittling process from there. Much easier starting with a dowel though, rather than starting with a square block. Here's my original. I now have 5, I went slightly larger. I just wanted to quickly show you a couple of things. So the first is, I know that my height of my workpiece is 18 mil, so I'm just going to use my marking gauge to knock this down to 18. So quite large threads in the screw, so it disappears down quite quickly. So yeah, I'm happy with that. And now, this is just going to allow me to score a line, very similar to what I was doing earlier, so that I know what I need to work to. You go in both directions. There we go. It's a faint line, but it's what I need. So I'm just going to mark a B on the bottom here, so that I know that's my base. So I'll do that for all of them. Now the second thing I wanted to do is create a template. 2 templates in fact. I don't know if they'll be useful, but because I'm doing 5 of them, I want to speed it up. So I want to know what 20 mil is, because I couldn't get 20 mil down. So I don't have a pair of compasses, but I do have a 20 mil hole. So I'm going to draw around that. Okay, that's 20 mil more or less. And then I'm actually going to do the same again, because I've got another idea for a second one. So I've got a second one there. Not perfect. Let's try that one more time, if possible. Just in one spot. That's better. Okay, so now with this one, I'm just going to roughly draw almost a spanner shape. Okay, I'll cut these both out. So, I hope with this one is to use it almost like calipers to be able to check if I'm getting close, rather than constantly have to knock it in there. Remember, this isn't the final piece, but it just happens to be the same size hole, which is really handy. So that's my caliper, and then with this, I would just be eyeballing it in the centre here, and just giving myself a pencil line to work towards, which will allow me to have some hope that I'm getting close. Because you need hope in projects like this, that you're getting close. Okay, so nothing special, but just gives me a pencil line. Actually, it shows me that I don't have to take too much off, which is great. So I'll do the same for everything else. I've made mistakes, I've done it on the top, so I'll correct that now. So with this template that I've just created, I've come up with a much better way, just to use a much darker fine line. Rather than working to the line, I'm going to try and hide this black line. So yeah, nice and easy, just line it, and it's easier than trying to mess about drawing around it. So I just look to line it up by eye, and then just almost colour in, and luckily it's about a nib's worth of colouring in to do, so it doesn't take long. And the cardboard is thick enough that it's stopping the ink from seeping under, so that's my line to work, to remove, to hide. And so I think that's going to be useful when it comes to carving. I'll know when to stop, and when hopefully that I'll know that I haven't gone too far. There we go, so just a little guide like that has probably saved me a huge amount of checking and back and forth. So I always think, you know, when there's an opportunity and it takes 5 minutes or less for anything like this, then if it's going to help with the project, then it's worth it. So next step, carving out these. I'll just demonstrate what my plan is on one of them. So the plan is to take the knife and just relatively lightly cut down. And what I'm doing here is I'm just breaking the fibres, almost like a knife wall. If I can roll it, even better, but it's not perfectly symmetrical. It is perfectly symmetrical, it's not. I clearly can't hold it straight. When I'm carving, I'll be able to carve in, put my fingers away. I'll carve down like this, here, and then back, and as soon as I hit that knife wall, it will split, it will peel away, rather than taking chunks into my shoulder, if you like. I like to keep a relatively clean shoulder, preferably even better than that one. Okay, let's get started carving this out. Okay, so I've cleared out most of my black. to just check myself. I need to turn that alarm off behind me, which tells me I need to get ready to go out. But first, can't help myself, let's check. Yeah, great on the bottom, goes in, so next step. And what's quite handy with this as well, is I can drive it down, I can try and twist it. And what I'm attempting to do here is actually mark the wood to show where it's biting, where the friction is. Because once that's marked, I can then use it as a guide to drive upwards from here and see where it's caught. So there, I've got a mallet if I need it. I'm now going to free it by using this one to pop it out. So I can see, got a very slight shoulder line around there. So I can work up from there into that knife wall and then go for a second time. So I'll come back to that. So after an hour of working on these, I'm done, and it's fair to say that I've honed my technique slightly. That was the first one I did with the dodgy lathe. That was the second one I did. Actually, as I went, I then realised that if I just improved my technique, I would have no reason for this saw cut here, which just allows a little bit of give, a little bit of pressure, a little bit of spring perhaps. So I just thought I'd very quickly run down on the technique that I landed on in the end. So I did almost everything using this carving knife. This was given as a gift to me, but you could use many different knives. It is handy because you can do very different cuts all the way along the blade. So what worked for me was very large, bulky cuts to begin with, working all the way around. And if you remember, I had the black line to work to, which was very helpful. I'd do that again. So very thick cuts from about halfway, maybe 2/3, quite harsh, all the way down and through, as you saw. Always keeping my fingers behind the blade, so that I could use a lot of force without worrying about losing any of these guys, because I'm quite attached to them. Thick, and then a thinner cut to run down the edges, the facets that appear, working it down until the black line starts to disappear. Then what I found through the trial and error of doing so many of these, you might have seen or not, that I was rolling this to get a really deep cut on the line. And then, to begin with, I'd initially gone in and just tried to go for it, but I wasn't getting great results with that. I was chipping some bits out, it just wasn't really working for me. So what I then tweaked, I started just using, although pressed down, just the very tip of the knife just to get edges off. And what I was essentially doing was, I guess, kind of creating that same knife wall with the chisel that we did before. So just scooping down until I hit my line. And that gave me a lip to work towards, so that then when I then did subsequent cuts, I was hitting the lip and the lip was stopping it, the ridge was stopping it, which then allows me to get further back and slightly more accurate. So that works quite well. So yeah, that was a condensed, probably about an hour and 15 minutes. I just had a podcast going, it was quite a nice morning. I didn't end up using this much at all because these holes, but I guess if I didn't have these so handy, then this would have become more helpful, but you know, this took 30 seconds to create, so no loss there, and this was really useful. Without that, this whole task would have been a lot more difficult. So there they are. So, despite having sacrificial board pushed up, on grabbing this and flipping it over, I have discovered plenty of breakout. That's my issue with chipboard. So, time to experiment with the wedges. I will be trying initially 5 centimetres, 50mm by 3. This is an offcut of my shooting board, so I'm not too worried. I'd like to get it, I don't have too much more plywood, so I'd like to get it right with this. It's 18mm, so it shouldn't be any higher than I'd ever need to be planing. So I'm just going to create the knife wall for the sawing. This part here I'm planning to use, it's got the original machine edge, so I know it's straight and I can't guarantee that for my own sawing. So I'm going to keep this spare. So I've made note for myself here, this is a machine edge, this is a machine edge, this isn't. So I'm going to keep this safe for the part later on. So let's get our knife wall drawn in. Shallow cut, getting slightly deeper at every pass. Okay, let's go. This was an arbitrary thickness. I think it worked out to be 4 centimetres, but yeah, 4 centimetres, but it's not a requirement for this project. And this is 20.5. Again, the way these wedges are going to work, it isn't determined by their length, it's determined by what they're pushing against. So, but 20.5 by 8, and then what's this? This is just what's left of the offcut, so 30 by 4. Now, I know that I can rest my scrape against this because it's the machined edge. Just give myself another guide. It's going to be a bit awkward. I'm right-handed. So I can stand in the sawdust pile. So when I created this setup, when I thought about it, with these pins I expected that I'd be able to then drive a wedge down, drive it down, and just wedge it in, like that for example, that's wedged-ish. But what I'm realising is that for these much more irregular shapes, that's not quite going to do it. And let's just very quickly have a look at whether it would have worked with other shapes. So I've got this, which I used to cut the wedge out, so that would go there, and then theoretically, if I had a much thinner wedge, I mean even this is showing me that it doesn't work for that. I wanted this to be as versatile as possible, and it's not working for me. So I'm going to change the tack slightly, and instead of these pegs in the side, I'm actually going to fix this across these 3 holes, although I could leave one of them for a peg for versatility. I'm going to screw this in, and this will actually allow for a much better wedge system. So I've got this piece here. Let's imagine that this is screwed. So I'll screw it with a bit of margin here, and then this gives this the opportunity to really come in and drive a really tight wedge and stop this from moving about, and I can use these pegs at the front and the back. It's a nice tight fit there, which means I end up throwing it. And one of these at the back, and I'll think of something to keep this butted up. Depending on how this goes, I might create 2 of these, left and right, and then theoretically I can have thinner and thicker wedges, so these can be fixed and these can be taken out. So that's my current thinking. So I'm going to screw this piece in. I don't think I'll need to do it on both sides, but I may. So yeah, let's get cracking. so I've got my piece here. This is now screwed down. Here's my wedge. This is not screwed down. Pegs are holding it in place. So if I start to just drive this wedge in, begins by moving backwards. There, it's pretty solidly held. This is moving about slightly. So I think I might put another wedge across here, but if I do, I'll make it slightly slimmer because I won't have much room left to play with if I have two pieces this large either side. So I think I'll do a thinner version of this wedge on this side. Let's give that a go. So I have an idea that I'd like to try with these two. They're very thin. Let's just see if I can clamp. Let's see if I can clamp these two together nice and equally. And what I'd like to do is give it a slight angle with a plane in order to, in effect, create a dovetail almost, so that it locks into the other. If you can imagine that these can have a slight angle, it would be easier to show what's up there. So I had this idea because when you're jointing two bits together, even if you're planing and you end up with a slight angle, it doesn't matter, they actually compensate for each other. So I thought, well, actually, that might create a better opportunity for these two to lock. So let's try and get them as flat as possible. We'll use this because we guarantee its flatness. Let's try and lock them in here, and then I'll plane. Best idea to plane plywood because it will dull my blade faster than other woods, but equally it's not the worst idea ever. So I'm going to try and deliberately put an angle into my planing. This is an old tea light. I'm just taking a little bit of wax. Just to finish off these last few strokes, try and get nice and smooth. And when I say smooth, what I actually mean is equal. So that I want to be making sure I'm taking shavings from both because that will give me this shared wonky angle. There we go, that's my final one. Let's take a look. That's not very dramatic at all, but I think I can see a very slight downward tilt, so that when I then look at this, they should be very slightly locked in more than if they were totally parallel. What I had to be really careful to do was ensure that both the wedges are driving this way, because if I had done them driving the opposite way, one going this way, one going that way, they'd be fighting themselves, so I'd be tapping this one in and it'd be loosening this one. So that's positive. Looks like with this here as well, it's a fairly decent fit. I could take this and just tap it in. I need to be a bit careful because these are soft faces. I might use something to be the go-between so I'm not whacking this soft plywood. I need to be careful with this edge as well because that's where it's going to be running. But it appears that that's fairly solidly in place because this weighs a decent amount, so the fact I can lift it up. And then I think I'm going to come up with something here and at the back to keep this from moving back and forth, which will really also, again, help with this locking in. Unfortunately, this is pushing up a bit, so my angle trick didn't quite do the job. But you win some, you lose some. If I'd gone for a much more dramatic angle, it would be more likely to work. So I had to do a little bit of thinking about which ends to place this wedge on. And the reason I'm placing it at this end
is so that as it tightens, it will push the block this way, and that is in the same direction as these two wedges are facing as well. So everything's working together to tighten that way. Whereas if this was at the back and I was trying to tighten it, it would be pushing the block this way, which pushing the workpiece this way, which would then be working against my clamping mechanism. So everything now is working together in the same direction.
Okay, after an embarrassing amount of faffing, I've decided a couple of things. One is I need a larger wedge. This one is too thin. It'd be great for some parts, so I'm definitely going to hang on to it. I did wonder whether I'd fit a clamp in there, but I think I want this to be easy to build even if you don't have access to clamps. So these angled pieces are the way forward, I think. I'll get this cut out and hopefully not back to the drawing board. Okay, so the next stage of this is the rails. Now there's a little bit of thinking that I want to do with these rails because for a couple of reasons. So here's my router. I want it to be able to fit the profile of the router, but thinking out loud, I'd also like to at some point, but not right now, make a longer base plate to distribute the weight, because my hope is that these don't bow and flex, but I imagine naturally there'll be some flex. I chose these L-shaped beams because they were the cheapest and thinnest that I could find while still having fairly decent strength across. And you know, I'm putting a good amount of pressure on and there's not much movement. Let's see if I can. So I can affect I can affect a small amount of movement when I push down, but not a huge amount. I think I would have learned my lesson the first time I got the router. Good news is I'd kept the tool of the router. Sorry router, you didn't deserve that. The bit was up inside, so I'm glad, otherwise that would have snapped right off and that would have been a real shame. Right, round two. Very sorry router, didn't deserve that. So let's measure our distance. So I'm going to give it a little bit of movement for the space plate later on, so that it doesn't have to be absolutely snug against that. So let's get a measurement. Wow, it's only 9.5. Still plenty of surface area for the router without. It's not the existing base plate. Okay, 9.5. And it's going to be very, very easy to achieve that measurement. It's just two of these. I'll probably do it that way to get the maximum. So let's measure those out now. close now, almost there. So I've created this, I've swept up all the metal filings, which were really insidious stuff. I can't imagine what a metal workshop is like. There's filings everywhere. Hopefully I won't be walking on them for ages, partly because I wouldn't want them getting embedded in the table and then in any projects. But anyway, it's all looking very close, and there's a couple of things that I need to do now. One is I've noticed that these are just slightly not square, these runners. Right now the only thing holding them in are some dowel, and I was hoping I could just keep some dowel, but just very slightly out of square, so I'll screw them in. That's one task to do. As I said, all the pieces are coming together, so I'll just give an overview of what we've got here. So we've got the sliding rail sorted with the router will sit here. I'll just grab that to demonstrate. And this will slide along, and I won't be using many large workpieces. What I want is I want the router bit driving, it's spinning clockwise, I want it driving the workpiece tighter and tighter into the clamp, so I want it spinning always clockwise. So theoretically, if I were to go across, down and back, I'm then really pushing it in a way that it's fighting the router bit, not working with it. So this will be a case of 1, 2, etc. So this is good. This will slide along these rails. Lots of other designs use aluminium, but what I wanted was a decent height, and I just wanted to work with what I can access easily and what I can work with. I don't have a bandsaw, so I'm just chopping these by hand rather than using metal parts. So that's the sliding mechanism, and then I've ended up with a few different elements for the locking mechanism. So I've got this spare part and this part, so that when I end up with very skinny parts to use, I can use this to jam in here alongside this, replacing the other part that you can see. This I've also found is very handy for knocking the wedges in or out, because when I was using some hardwood, it really dents it, whereas softwood on softwood, plywood on plywood in this case, with the mallet, whack it on. I don't need the ends to be in perfect condition, it's just this length that is useful. So a whacker is a useful part. If they got this part, I'm not totally convinced by this part at the top here, it's a bit experimental, a bit random, but it's working for now. It just means that when I set the workpiece up, I need to do a couple of things. I need to push it quite far forwards, so that as this starts to go down, it then actually starts to lock, whereas if this workpiece is here, this is obviously doing nothing. So I need to remember that these wedges on the sides always need to start with enough room for me to tap them down and still have clearance for this here. So that's important. I would then tap these in with a mallet, tap there, and then dangerously close enough my router off at this point again. So that's already becoming slightly fixed, it's struggling to move backwards, and that's when this one then comes in here, really drives in, and in driving it down with the wedge, it's working with these parts, everything's working in unison, and it's a nice secure piece. So there is a bit of an elephant in the room, and that is, why did I spend so much time and effort drilling holes and making these pegs? And the reason for that was I thought that I could use pegs and a single wedge rather than screwing wedges in. I wanted absolute flexibility and not have anything screwed in, but with the trial and error of building this, I found that the pegs just weren't solid enough in order to hold this down. So I changed it up. It means that I'm left with a load of holes, and if you were building this yourself, you've got a choice here to keep the holes because they offer some element of some dust clearance. The dust will get less clogged up. And I also don't feel too bad about the time that I spent working on these, because these are going to be really handy because they do fit the holes of my workbench beneath. So I've got, I think, 5 or 6 of these that I've created, so I'm quite chuffed actually. But I will say that they're not required. So I've marked out where I'm going to drill. It's actually interestingly asymmetrical. It seems like this needs pulling from the back slightly in order to square up this space, and this needs pulling for the opposite side, the front, so this is ended up asymmetrical, but hopefully it will work. And I think if I don't drive, I'll countersink them quite aggressively, and then I can have a little bit of movement. I can basically adjust these faces, so that could be quite useful. I don't think I need to worry about being perfectly square, but I have punched the hole to help guide my pilot hole. So I've considered one design feature. I'm going to add a chamfer
here, so that when these are getting locked into place, I like to think that they might push down slightly on the piece of wood that I'm trying to flatten, because at the moment I'm getting a tiny bit of where it will raise up or spring up slightly. So I'm not sure if it'll work, but there's no harm in trying because it will still keep the face. So I need to mark these chamfers here, and then I'll use my plane. For ease, I'm going to use my 45 angle here to mark out where I need to be, and I just need to make sure that I don't get twisted and choose the right side. So the opposite of what I just did there. So off camera, I've just planed a much more successful, it's not quite a dovetail, but angle there, which I hope will keep these slightly more locked in and stop them from riding up as it exerts pressure on this side. I think that will keep it lower, which hopefully will help. The way that I did it before wasn't correct. I had tried keeping them, I planed them like that essentially. This is a new part, and what I did is I just was a lot more thoughtful about where things went. So this is clear from the top, this is the top here, so I marked out the sort of angle that I wanted here, as you can see, didn't need to be perfect, and then marked out the how it needed to be parallel, but that wasn't my final gauge line. So I was then realised that I needed to put these edges together parallel, not these edges. So it ended up being held very wonkily in the vise, but that was what I needed in order to get that shared angled face. So there we go, I'll screw this back on, and then we've got a better, hopefully, better design there for the slide. This is the failed experiment with putting a notch here to try and pull it down slightly. It really didn't work. I mean, maybe it would have worked if it had that angle on that side and that angle, because it would have been held down firm, maybe. But I'm so impressed with this that I'm actually going to repurpose this for the back here, on the front, depends how you look at it. So I'll unscrew this and put another angle in this, and an angle in this, because yeah, really convinced it that that is doing a great job of pinning things down. One thing that's worth mentioning is by using this, I am retiring this, which again was another failed experiment. Perhaps less so if I hadn't have angled this part here, but it just meant that once this part of the doze foot disengaged against the block, it would then slip forward, and I'd have to keep knocking all the way down. So I could probably rescue this piece by just creating a right angle here. But for now I don't need to, because I've got this. So I'll just take you through the process that I went through in order to get the angle. I'll use my 90, but actually it ends up being far more of a guide than anything else. And I need to be very thoughtful with this. So that is the top, because it's got my countersinks in, and so therefore that's my angle there. What I found with this last one is you don't actually end up really following this angle, it's just my guide. This one, I've got this to tell me which side, so I know that this needs to be going this way. So I'll just draw that on as a rough guide to remind me. And it's really easy to remember on this one because it's the opposite to this. So at that point, I then ensure that these two will be clamped together, and rather than try and line this up like this, it's actually this corner that needs to be against this corner. These two need to be as close to flat as we can get it, but I'll be taking it down with the plane anyway. So that's going to get locked in to the bench, and then I do need to do one more thing when it comes to the ends in order to stop me from, I think it's called blowout, where you just bust past this end here when you're planing. I can't remember the name, but I don't want to do it. So very rough, but it's just to stop, as I'm planing, to stop me from just knocking these corners off. Just on these two. That's the blowout that I was talking about, where it just takes the end off. It doesn't matter with this part, but that would be devastating if it was a part that I've been working on for a long time and it was more important. So there we have it. I'll just take some sandpaper to this, but we have an angle there and then the corresponding angle there. So now when this is driven down, hopefully that's deep enough. Might be a little bit too shallow. You know what, I might even go back to that and carry on for a bit longer. You might be able to hear I'm slightly out of breath, so not thrilled by that idea, but I will take it down a bit more. Hard to tell if there's a massive difference, but I think I've got a bit of a sharper angle there. That seems to be doing a brilliant job. Very nice. I'm just going to knock these in to tighten up. Yeah, happy with that. At one point I was doing all of this fettling, angles here, messing about with all different wedges, and I was despairing a bit, wondering if this would ever sit flush. But it does seem to be doing really well. I've got a slight raised part here, but it's very unlikely that this is perfectly flat to begin with. There's just no movement. I can lift the whole thing using it. So yeah, really, really impressed with these angles. Definitely worth doing that. With this design, I've made it fit lots of different pieces. If I needed extra height, I could add more railing on here. So if this was a lot taller, I could add railings. And then if things are wider, I can nudge things out, swap them in. I might spend the time putting angles on the replacement parts. So this one could go here, I could take this out, and then as you can see, I could have a lot wider part. So almost this width. As I've mentioned, I just don't have much room to work with here. So it's the more compact it is, the better. I will create extra wedges as and when I need them. But yeah, it's looking pretty good. Off camera, I've just screwed in a small railing of softwood on the bottom so that when I work with this workbench, I can lock it in place. It was an offcut from this process. So just a railing there, 5 screws, a very shocked face. And then this just slots in, so it can't move back and forth once I've tightened it. So tighten that side, and then just touches here as it goes round. Tighten that side, and that means that I can lift the whole workbench. I don't need to, I'm not going to, but that's how tightly held it is. And I mean, this is risky, but let's see. I can lift the whole workbench with my piece. I'm pretty chuffed with that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the process. This took me a while, but I know that if I hadn't gone down some of the dead ends that I'd gone down, some of the mistakes that I made, it would have taken me less time. As is always the case with this, is sometimes those moments that are the moments that push you forwards, and that's the learning process. So it's been fun. I'm looking forward to using this more and more and in my projects moving forwards. And I think I just wanted to say thank you for joining me. Of all the videos you could have clicked on and watched, you clicked on this one, and I really appreciate that. So thank you very much. I hope you're inspired to get out and make something, even if you've just got a small space and not many tools.